Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, grace. Who deserves it? What about justice? And how does it really help us? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You hit me, I hit you back. You disrespect me, I disrespect you. That would be the opposite of grace. Grace is generally considered offering a kindness anyways, when it's maybe undeserved, or you feel it is. I don't feel our culture gives a lot of value to the idea anymore. We're afraid that letting a wrong go unpunished will enable others. I struggle with that too. I do struggle with that. But as our mental health continues to decline, we find more people in more relational conflict than ever. So I wanted to dig into this lost art of grace. So I sat down with Julia Baird. Julia is an Australian journalist, broadcaster, and internationally best-selling author who contributes to the New York Times, the Sydney Morning Herald. She's the co-host of the Not Stupid podcast. And she has a brand new book out titled Bright Shining: How Grace Changes Everything. I really dug into the hard questions around grace and ultimately came away asking myself, what kind of person do I want to be? What behavior will add the most to my life as well as others? One who errs on the side of grace or just tit for tat? And when I'm not having these conversations on human potential, I'm working directly with people on their human potential. You can connect with me at kevinmiller.co. Here are a few sponsors that make the show possible. Then drive with myself and Julia Baird as we talk about grace. Who deserves it? What about justice? How does it really help us? Let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Julia, when your book came across my desk, I was automatically interested. The aspect of grace, I come from a pretty staunch religious background and have the kind of the trappings of that. But then looking at life today, and as we were just talking about off camera, it seems like we see less and less and experience less and less grace every day. And I'm here in America, you're in Australia. I don't know if it's worldwide, but I know over here, you don't see much as you scan the headlines or social media and even in our face-to-face lives. So I think I want to start off by saying just thank you. Thank you for bringing this to the forefront.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I know it does feel weirdly countercultural in a strange way that after years of having our outrage, monetized and fed back to us, and after watching a lot of politics kind of play into our fears and our anxieties, and using the common wisdom that, if you play to those, it'll be more successful electorally. I do feel that people are craving to know and speak about the best of humanity, the times when we connect, the things that we share, the way that we can be. And I did really find that writing the book that we don't see a lot of it on the political stage. We don't necessarily see a lot of it in public life, but it will be rooted all around you in your neighborhood. On your street, there's probably someone who's a blood donor. There's probably someone else who's volunteers or who cares. Or and it, honestly, down at the local hospital is where you'll find a lot of kindness for people who, again, the idea being that people don't necessarily deserve it. You're not going to just give these things to your friends. You're going to give it to a human who's in need. So I was really struck by that, because it's, in a way, it's just reminding us that we need to shift our lens and focus on that when it's actually around us all the time.
Well, you just said the word deserve, which we'll dive into shortly here. I interested myself in you being a journalist and being an influencer. I mean, you speak to people, you reach a lot of people, and you're in the business of appealing to people, in essence. And I do appreciate your cat on the video there. Everybody watching, there's
Hello,
what's cat's
there
name?
She is. This is Luna. She's about to attack me. She's a lunatic. Okay.
Well, she needs her moment of fame too. Fair enough. But you're in the business of headlines, of attracting listeners, viewers, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I don't know when it was coined. It was a long time ago. If it bleeds, it leads. And so whatever happens, we know is generally going to be dramatized. It's generally negative. And you're in that business. So we want to go out and we want to proclaim the good news. It doesn't sell as much. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you've asked that question, because it is something that is currently preoccupying us, a lot of us in the media, because people are becoming news avoidant. It gets too much. You turn off, like you're trying to get about your daily life and just, look after your kids or your parents or your community, or just get by. And this can make you so anxious when you're reading like so much negativity and overwhelm, when you feel like you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Like you're being constantly presented with problems that we can't actually do anything about. And I used to host a show on ABC television here in Sydney, in Australia, and it was a current affairs show, and we tried to look at problems. We always tried to bring in solutions. On the very last night of the show, at the end of last year, after like a 12-year run, I wanted to look at hope. Like, where does hope lie? In all of this, after all we've spoken about, are we listening to each other? And that's a really big thing. And I did find in researching that you're absolutely right. We're not just sensing that things are being negative. It's actually true. Someone's done a study over 20 years of newspaper headlines in the US and found they had become markedly more negative over that time. So when I start writing about things like awe and grace and wonder, I notice this first to know what it is we share. Can you hold one sec? My son's brushing his teeth behind me.
That's all right.
Can you close that door, Sam?
Sure.
Have a good day. He's about to go to school.
It'll probably get us more viewers.
So, yeah, and I noticed this real like hunger to talk about the things that lift us up, and really honestly the reasons we have to go on. Someone asked me once, what is the dominant like emotion around grace? And I don't see it as emotion, but I realized that my first response was comfort. I just feel so comforted to know that people like this exist in the world, that people act like this in the world, that this is actually essentially also who we are.
Yeah.
People who in the middle of a natural disaster will be down there giving away their things, looking after other people. The way that communities rally around those that are hurt or vulnerable at those times, I think, can always be quite astonishing. So we're confronted with both the, vision of people, bereft and struggling and enduring a tragedy, but at the same time, we'll see others rallying and caring, and it can be quite astonishing, actually.
Well, the emotion of grace. I had not thought about that. And I just shared this on another show last week, that in the past, 3 or 4 weeks or so, I had 2 instances of grace around gasoline. There was a lady, broken down car coming down my little mountain pass, and I picked her up and took her in to get gas. She didn't have any money, or said she didn't. So I paid for it and took her back to her car, and it was fine.
Yeah.
And then a couple weeks later or so, I dropped my kid off and realized that I'm below empty in my car. I'm like, honey, just get out of the car. I got to get to the gas station. I'm literally afraid I'm going to run out of gas. I just have been spaced out. Yeah. And went over to the gas station thinking, just kind of a little anxiety, like I'm really going to run out of gas.
Yeah.
I pull in. I cannot find my wallet. I look everywhere. I'm looking for cash. I'm looking for anything, and I can't find it. And I realize, wait a minute, I've got my credit card numbers in my phone. And so I go into the little place and I say, gosh, can you guys, and I feel like such a lame. I lost my wallet,
Yeah, right.
And
but I've got a photo of someone's card. Yes.
Yeah. And I said, can you, I'm not bereft. I've got my numbers. Can you just take that? And they said, no, we can't. And this scruffy looking dude behind the counter, he says, hey man, I got you. We'll put some in there. And I'm thinking he's saying, we'll put some in there so you can go get your wallet and come back. And so I'm like, okay, great. So I'll put that in there and then I should be back. But if I don't find it right away, it may be a little longer. He says, no, you don't owe anything. Just just take it. And this dude's behind the counter at a gas station. So he's not raking in the money, and he looks like he's not raking in the money. He says, I got you. I'm just helping a brother out. Yeah. Really? Okay. And so I was on the receiving end. Now I'm a 6 foot tall, white, proud American male. I don't need anything, right? I don't need help. And here I am. And my point is, it felt so much better. If you're talking about emotions, I hadn't thought about it. I had far more emotions in receiving than giving.
Do you know what? You're giving me goosebumps. It's so funny because scientists talk about awe. One of the ways of measuring awe is goosebumps.
Huh.
And I got to grace. Well, I've always been thinking about grace, like my whole life, probably because of my mother. But I got to grace through studying and thinking about awe. In other words, being stopped and thinking about things that are bigger than us, that we kind of struggle to understand, that we marvel at, and that actually are just so good for us psychologically and in terms of, our levels of contentment and altruism and so on. And studies show that people actually nominate. There was a study of by Dacher Keltner of 26 countries, 2,600 people, and they asked them what their most common experience of awe was. And I'm still so amazed by it, because I would have said nature. But right, for you, mountains.
I read this in your book, and same thing. I'm thinking, for me, it's a mountain. I'm out here in Colorado. It's a mountain. You're up on top of a 14,000 foot peak, or the sunset over the ocean. So I'm with you, and you surprised me with keep going on the story.
Yeah. And then, but the number one thing that they found was actually seeing it in each other, seeing acts of moral beauty, seeing great, generosity, kindness, people overcoming disability, like just ways of being towards each other. And I thought it was really important to remember that. I'm like, why don't we don't actually talk about that. That is the number one way in which we experience awe, a thing that can move us so profoundly, like your experience at the gas station. And that you give me goosebumps just hearing you talk about that, because it's this, again, it's like the best of who we are. And who knows who that person is? Who knows what he was in his personal life? He doesn't know anything about you. But you're a guy that needed something and he gave it to you. And he didn't yell at you. He just looked after you in that moment. So that's why I wanted to write about it. I'm like, let's just talk about this some more. Let's have a conversation about what it looks like, and then what our lives would be like if we thought about it more, talked about it more, and kind of honed in on those moments, because they are there. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, and you just alluded to it, that any book like this, I'm thinking there's a story. There was a catalyst. You didn't just sit around one day as a journalist and think, Grace, interesting topic, I'll write a book about it. Yeah. There was a personal experience behind it. You just mentioned your mother.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah. So my mother was just one of these like very beautiful souls that was that she talked a lot about grace, and she was a woman of strong faith. And I just saw in her an ability to see the best in people. And she was always encouraging me to do that. Like, I would call her and go, Mom, this woman at work is driving me absolutely bonkers, And she'll be like, listen, you've just got to love her more. You've got to work out a way to love her. I'm like, did you hear me? Like, this woman is a complete jerk. Like, how can you even? So she was often confronting me to behave in a way that a person didn't necessarily deserve.
Yeah.
And not that I always pull that off, but she would make me think about that. Like, there's an alternate path. And I also saw her, there were times when I knew people were going through public scandals, or were being vilified, or were in just a terrible place. And she would always be there, and she would always be looking after people. And also with forgiveness. So I saw the impact that she had on people around her, and the way it lifted people up and gave them another shot at life. And so it just had a very powerful impact on me, that there was, through it all, through the eye for an eye, and even just being, nice or kind to people, there's a third way beyond that. which is even when they don't deserve it. Like if your neighbor down the road is, ill, and you've always been quite friendly with them and you look after them, you mow their lawn, you bring them casseroles, then that's a kind and compassionate thing to do. If that same person had always, I don't know, yelled at your kids, been some kind of jerk, and you found out they were very ill and you still looked after them and did that, that's grace. This is someone who really fundamentally doesn't deserve it. And it's really hard to do because we're always weighing people up, who deserves what, right? So to step back and say, how John McCain said when we were talking, when you guys had that big debate about torture in Guantanamo Bay, and he was saying it's not who they are, it's who we are. In some ways, grace is about lifting other people up and connecting with other people, but it's also about who you choose to be in a moment that might not make sense. It actually doesn't really necessarily make sense.
I wanted to ask about that in regards to your mom, because you said, she is just one of those people, rare people, who tends to see the best in other people. And you saw the impact it had on those people. But I wanted to ask about the impact that you saw, regardless of their understanding of the grace, of any reciprocity, of any response at all. What did you see as the result of your mom's kindness for your mom?
She had a very strong sense of calm and purpose, I think. And even though let's say that person was immune to it or was taking advantage of her, and I don't think you should be allowing people to take advantage of you. Like, obviously, there's limits to those kinds of things. But and we were all watching.
Yeah.
And think about the impact on me as a kid, and I'm now devoting years of my life to studying it and to understanding it. And I know that she had that kind of impact on other people. And one of the things about grace is there's a phenomenon called the moral elevation. So what's the effect on you when you watch someone do something, you did a really decent, kind, magnanimous? Like, what if you suddenly discover that the CEO of your company spends his weekends I don't know, down at the local surf club volunteering and stopping people from drowning in rips, or reading newspapers out for people who are blind, or going down to the aged care home, or who'd taken a pay cut but not told a soul, just so he could keep some other people, or she could keep some other people on during COVID. You find out things like that. And the research shows that you will have a physical response to it a lot of the time. It affects your heart rate. It affects your health, but it also affects your outlook on life. It creates, at work, there's studies around how it creates a better culture. People are more likely to mimic that behavior. And a lot of it comes down to it's infectious. So you see it, you're more likely to do it. And I think that's the kind of impact you have. You can't quantify it at the time, but people around you will respond to it. What if it's a teacher giving a kid who's just rebellious and rude all the time a second chance because they understand where they're coming from or what they're dealing with at home? Or like a friend of mine who went off the rails when his brother was killed in a motorbike accident when he was about 18 or 19. And a policeman gave him a second chance, and that changed his life forever. Those are the moments. Does that cop know that? Possibly, probably not.
I want to think so. Yes. I ponder a lot this issue of, on the deserving aspect of it. So my interest is what it does for me to give grace to somebody. The benefit right off the bat is to me, regardless of what happens to them or what they do with it. But Julia, the thing that I have pondered for a long time is there seems to be this grappling between, as you said, somebody deserving. And the big word that comes to me is enabling. And that question of, am I just enabling somebody by forgiving them, by giving grace to them when they don't deserve it? And especially, I think, for a parent, you see that and you think, I'm not going to support that poor decision from your kid, and
Totally.
to just give it grace is going to enable it. And we've seen that happen. And to me, it feels like a tension. I don't know that there's a black and white answer, but I see the tension. I should own it. I feel the tension in myself. And I know a lot of other people grapple with giving grace and the question of enabling poor behavior.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a really fundamental part to this, because I don't know if you sensed it when reading it, but the part I struggled with most writing it, and I thought about so hard, was forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because again, I've grown up with that as a core and a fundamental value. I, have been forgiven for things. I've seen forgiveness be a really powerful thing, but I've also, as a reporter, worked with victims of domestic violence, and I have seen forgiveness be weaponized against them to make them stay, to make them continue on in this relationship, which is destroying them. I've also reported on survivors of sexual assault, and they'll say that in counselling sessions, they'll be going, I really feel this pressure to forgive. Now, there's a fundamental tension here, because it should never be aside from justice. Like, it shouldn't be like, no, you're completely off the hook. If someone has done a terrible thing, then there should be justice and there should be consequences for that. But you might not hold them to it, or you might decide, in the case of assault or violence, you might decide to disconnect yourself from the things that they've done to you. And some people call it an unburdening. It's a concept that I quite liked. I did meet people that were very extremely forgiving in circumstances that would defy logic. There was a man called Chris Carrier from Texas, and he's this wonderful guy. When you speak to him, he does emanate this kind of calm. And he was, when he was 10 years old and he was living in in Florida, he was taken. He got a bus home from school, and at the bus stop, someone came up to him and said, I'm organising a party for your father. I work with him. Can you help me choose some decorations? This guy took him back to his motorhome, put like a pick through him, then took him out to the motorglades, the glades?
Everglades.
Motorhome and Everglades. I was like,
close enough. I like it.
Took him out to the Everglades and shot him and left him.
Holy smokes.
10 years old. He came to 4 days later. There were cigarette burns up and down his arm. He thinks people were trying to work out if he was still alive or not. And they never pinned that guy who did that to him. He had problems picking him out in a lineup because on the day he'd had a cap right over his face, and it was so he grew up in this neighborhood knowing that, in a really strong community that had supported him, but knowing that this guy was on the loose and that they never managed to find him. And then decades down the track, Chris had got married, had kids, and he got a call from the detective that had been running the case saying that guy that we suspected, he's now in a nursing home or an aged care home, and he's confessed. Do you want to accept that confession?
Wow.
And Chris said, yes, I do. And he went in and he took a friend, and he said he walked into that place and there was a frail figure in a chair. He said he probably weighed, like 70, 80 pounds. He was tiny. He was friendless. It was the end of his life. And he talks about how he thought how horrible it would be to be that person. Anyway, the guy says, after some questioning, yes, I did. Chris's friend says, did you leave a boy to die in the woods? And he said, yes, I did. And he says, if he was standing here right now, what would you like to say to him? And he said, I'm sorry. And the man started to cry. And Chris said, okay, I'm glad that you said that, but I need you to know that I forgive you. And they had a long conversation. Chris visited that guy every 2 days until his death, which was like 3 weeks later. He read to him. He prayed with him. He brought him smoked lumberjack, which apparently was his favourite treat. And I had a long several long conversations with Chris about this, and he was like, I wanted to show my children there was a different way to be, that you can break a cycle of violence. But that's not separate to justice. That guy totally should have served time. It was just like way too late. Of course he should have gone in for that. And he also said it had to involve his remorse as well. He had to have said sorry for that to be able to happen. So cases like that just blow me away.
Okay, Julie, I want to ask about that. I actually pulled that out of your book, and you
did? Okay.
mentioned Auntie Lorraine in that, and her statement of forgiveness is a word I hate. So that stuck out to me. I just recently spent a week with a couple, and the lady is 76. When she was 11 years old, her father sexually abused her. Yeah. And he wasn't a bad father, she says. Things were pretty good. It was just somewhat out of left field, but began sexually abusing her. She went through a lot of, recovery, healing, whatnot, and came to a place of forgiving him.
Yeah.
Then when her daughter was 11 years old, he sexually molested her daughter. And that gives me negative chill bumps.
That's her.
And she says, I tried, I thought I should forgive him. Yeah. And the story goes on. She says, ultimately, I received the greatest freedom in my soul when I decided I'm not forgiving him and I don't have to.
Yeah.
So I'm with this lady. I know her. We're very close now. Yeah. And one of the most peaceful, contented souls I have ever met. And yet she says, I don't forgive him. I'm not going to, I don't need to. And I'm never going to, I don't even know if he's alive anymore. I don't think he is, but I shut him off from my life. Well, I come again from this religious background that not forgiving somebody is what's the quote? Drinking poison and hope that they. Yes. And so your book is the second time I've heard somebody ever say, no, I decided not to. I don't. And in your book, she said, forgiveness is a word I hate.
Yes.
I have actually asked this lady to write about this because I've shared it with some people who I feel like are stuck under this weight of, quote, forgiveness. Some people close in my life. And I think it's not working. And you said taking the pressure off. You just said a second ago, that people talked about feeling the pressure to need to forgive.
Yeah.
Again, I feel like there's a tension here because most people can't reconcile it, but I feel like a lot of people are trying to forgive something that they cannot forgive and maybe shouldn't. Yeah. But we don't really have a
language
container to hold
it.
that.
No. I mean, it's a very particular thing I completely do agree with that. And I do think we actually need another language. But with Arnie Lorraine Peters, so she was part of the Stolen Generations in Australia, and I know there have been similar things in North America, which is, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids taken from their families and sent to institutions where they were trained to be domestic workers, really made to be white. They were stripped of their language, of their homes, of their families, of their cultures, and the ongoing impacts of that are very real in terms of intergenerational trauma. She was abused, just some horrific things went on in that home. And so when one of our prime ministers said, okay, we've said sorry, we've apologized as a nation for that, and now it's on you to forgive. It was so jarring because firstly, culturally, a lot more needs to be done to kind of make up for that. But secondly, it's like it puts another burden on the people who've been harmed. Like you now have a burden to forgive. And it feels like an exoneration. It feels like you're letting people off the hook and saying, oh, it's okay now. Yeah. And I do think that sometimes it should be about I won't speak for Arnie Lorraine, but because that very specific trauma and all the issues of race around it are really, I think that our entire country still needs to talk about and understand in a storytelling and a truth-telling exercise. But when I think about, let me tell you an example of a woman. Like I spent a lot of time talking to people who'd gone through restorative justice processes. So you bring in, this is often an adjunct or parallel to the criminal justice system. Like And it's being driven by victims who often feel that in a court system they're not heard or they don't have the chance to have their say. And you bring together the person who caused the harm with the person who the harm was done to, and they talk, and the victim will try to get whatever they want. They might want more information. They might want to call them to account. They might want to just hear more. The stories are like mind-blowing. Sometimes, a mother might just say, okay, what were my child's last words? That's all I need to know from you. The people that work in this area do often talk about a moment when these people are facing each other, where something quite astonishing can happen when they recognize each other. And again, remembering this is driven by the victim. So one of the preconditions is there has to be remorse. You would not bring together a psychopath with someone that they'd hurt and have them talk it out, because the psychopath will be like, I don't care. I have no remorse. I don't care.
Julia, I want to just hit that, because one of the things I failed to say, as you talked about that instance where with the kid, the boy who was left, and the guy apologized and cried. In my story that I just was privy to recently, that was a standout thing. There was never an apology. When it was dealt with the first time, and she tried to forgive, then dealt with the second time, never an apology. And that did play into it. So just to back up what you're saying, that there seemed to be no remorse.
Yeah, that is huge. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just leaving it open for the harm to continue. Then why does the victim need to be? It does feel like you are kind of letting them off the hook, or enabling, as you've said. Yeah. So, I want to tell you about this woman, Debbie McGrath, that I spoke to. So when she was 24 years old, she gets a call in the middle of the night from her father saying, your brother has just been killed. And it was his best friend, shot him for no apparent reason. They'd been down at the pub playing darts. They went back, kept drinking, and he just got out a gun and shot him. And there was a whole criminal trial, and he was put in prison, but she became consumed with rage. Just absolutely, it ate her up. She, she started sleepwalking, and she had insomnia, and she had diabetes and all these health issues. Her father was the same. There was a lot of kind of disintegration and suffering manifest physically in that family. And she told me that she got to the point where she would be looking at a sunset and thinking about ways she could torture and kill him. And she eventually decided to sit down with him in a restorative justice process. And she said to him, okay, this is what you did to me. This is my health, my family. So this is what you did to my father, and spelt it all out. This is what you did to my brother's son, who was a toddler and never had the chance to have a father growing up. This is what you did. And she said to me there was a point at which, during the whole process, that she went, oh, and she kind of involuntarily sat up and looked over her shoulder, because she felt like something had been lifted from her, physically from her shoulders. And she said she realized at that point she had got everything he did to her in a suitcase and left it with him. And was like, that is yours now. What you did to me, that is yours. It's not mine. And one thing she'd been really scared about was losing her ability to love, because that to love to her had meant loss and pain. And she was worried she wouldn't be able to love her grandchildren. And after she did that, she was on the phone to me saying, I can love my grandkids. Like, my whole life has changed. And it's like, it seems strange that you can get that moment from someone who's done so much harm to you, but she somehow did. So, yeah.
So I've been working on a project with a couple therapists very deeply, and a lot of it deals with trauma. And I'm thinking about it in regards to what you just shared, that a trauma happens, to you. Like in this case, her brother was killed, or with the other boy, he was left for dead. Yeah. And we're left with this baggage of what it does to us, or I guess bigger, would you say, what I'm thinking about is what it means about us, what it means about us. And that to come back and face it like that is to somewhat realize it didn't really mean anything about that kid who was left for dead. It was, call it bad luck or whatever, but it means there's a broken human that hurt him for no reason. Same thing with your friend here. There was this guy that shot him for whatever reason. He was unfortunately with somebody who had some big level of brokenness. It didn't mean anything about her brother. It didn't mean anything about her, but that propensity that we have to take it upon ourselves and write a story about what it means about us and suffer from it for years or forever. Yeah. And yet coming in, it didn't mean about her. I'm thinking about that as you share that she left it with him. It was really about him. Yeah. Does that track?
100%. It's exactly right. It's his. And that's what Annie Lorraine said to me as well. That stuff that you did to us, that's yours. Don't give me that burden of what you did. I think that sometimes with forgiveness, that's what we do. We put it back on the victim instead of saying, and look, there's a righteous anger. I mean, and you don't necessarily have to shed that. But I think that a point at which you realize it's consuming you or it's hurting you or that harm is still enduring in you, I think there's ways around it. There's ways to push that back to them. We've seen the physical consequences of people forgiving. We've kind of, and if you've ever, obviously you and I have not, I'm not talking about horrific crimes here, but if you've been forgiven for something, you know how that can change things for you.
In the book, I'm going to ask you to do this, Julia. You do give a definition of, as one of the first things I wrote in my notes is define grace. And you do that later, but I'm going to ask you to do that here. And then another question alongside that then is so I'm going to ask you to define it as you do in the book. And then also I'm curious what you feel like is the opposite of grace. Mm-hmm. So 2 questions.
Yeah. Obviously, this isn't the definitive version. There's something about grace which is ineffable and mysterious, partly because when we see it, it doesn't seem to make sense, or it seems to almost be like otherworldly. So I think fundamental to grace is this question of it not being deserved. It's mercy, not merit. It's giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's not defining people by the worst thing they've done. It's loving the unlovable, forgiving the unforgivable with those limits we've discussed before. And it's about the way you love. It's not about the worthiness of the recipient. And I think that you can see it in very many different forms, but actually that is the heart of it.
So I'm thinking, as you say that, to think of, we have to be discerning, I guess, or it helps us to be discerning. Are we enabling or whatnot? But in essence, I'm thinking, if I'm a vegetarian, or no, go further. If I'm a vegan, I am a person who doesn't eat animal products. Yes. It's pretty, and I just am. It does. So you mean only on Mondays, right? No, I don't eat animal. I'm just making this up. I was vegan and I'm not anymore. Okay. I left that religion personally, but the concept of I'm the kind of person who I would say in that scenario doesn't eat animal products. And it's not just certain days, or it's not only unless it's there at a potluck or whatever. No, I just don't. In this, you have me considering that, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, I can choose to be the kind of person who just gives grace. Yes. And if the answer is, oh, you mean if it's deserved? No, just anyways. Yeah. So even if it's undeserved, I just give grace. That feels more tangible, I guess, to look at it. Again, but there's that tension of.
Yeah, but I think the tension is being alive on this world. Yeah. There's a few myths around about grace. I think firstly it is that, often people think it's something that women should do, like it's something that's often applied to women people think it's about them being nice or polite or just putting up with stuff. That is not the case.
Loving and nurturing and all the stuff.
And putting up with a lot of crap, honestly. Yeah. Or they think it is like the entirety of a person that will decide that we want to lean towards grace or have more grace in our lives, and therefore we'll all be quite saintly and we'll walk around and, daisies will spring up in our path and everything will become clear and obvious.
Right.
I don't see it like that. I think you decide to lean a certain way and be a certain way and reach towards that which is good and can have a huge impact in the world. We can lean towards, again, that different way of being. And you know what? Like, oh my gosh, there's like, if you're in a workplace and again, someone is driving you crazy or undermining you or bullying you, you have to think about not enabling someone, but you also don't want to get down there in the pit and scrap around, right? Yeah. So you might have to make a whole bunch of different decisions. Let me give you an example. There's a family in Sydney, the Abdullah family, and they had the every parent's nightmare happened to them. Three of their kids were out with one of their cousins. They went down the street to get an ice cream. A driver came along who was intoxicated, speeding, ran them over, killed them all. They quite quickly decided to forgive this guy. And it was one of those moments in Australia where we were like, how? Like, how? What can you do? And again, they were the Catholics, they had a strong faith. And the guy, Danny, the father, said to me, we make the decision we want to live that way, but then I still wake up and I've got like the pain and the brokenness and all of it.
Yeah.
And I kind of have to, go through it again, but that's the way we've decided to be. So I think it is, a lot of people talk about training your mind and muscles. People have talked about kindness being a muscle and hope. And I think of it in the same way. Like, if you focus on that and if you have those conversations, if you talk to your children about what it's like, you talk to the people around you about what happened to you at that gas station, others are more likely to do the same things. And you won't do it every day. If you spent your days down at the local gas station paying for everyone's gas, you'd be kind of broke quite quickly. Mm-hmm. Although a few people would be in your situation, obviously, and you'd already done that for someone. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking I'm back to parenting as I'm musing about parenting that my mom, I grew up, my dear mom would often say major on the majors, not on the minors. And I found myself doing that with my kids and looking at whatever happened, an infraction or a bad behavior or whatever it is. And questioning, is it best for them right now for me to just have, let me keep going, to have grace and just let it go and just say, hey, that wasn't very kind, but you're struggling, or I don't know, we'll give it whatever reason, but just sometimes not. And then sometimes to go, well, we do need a little justice in this case.
Totally.
There does need to be consequence. So as a parent, when and when not to, quote, give grace.
Can you remember when your parents forgave you for something? What was it?
Oh, I'm a little ashamed to admit how many times I did things. Yeah. I remember starkly the times when there was a consequence that to me was really harsh. I remember those. And then I also, though, I'm aware of so many times, especially in school, I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. And I think they usually looked at that and go, well, I got a consequence. They're not going to double up on it. And they gave a lot of grace.
Yeah. I remember one time, it was so small, but we were moving house and I had a picture frame and I dropped it on the way to taking it into the house and it broke. And they were like, how did that happen? I'm like, I don't know how it just broke. I remember my mother saying to me, you're not in trouble. I need to know, you need to tell me the truth though. It took me like about an hour and I was like, okay, I broke the frame. And she was like, that's good. I'm really glad that you told me the truth. And it's so weird. That's always stuck with me. And when I was writing my chapter on forgiveness, I was in the middle of it and I was in Japan. I'd taken my son there. Now, when you travel to Japan, they've got this system of tickets for the train that you buy before you leave the country. Like you buy it in America. I buy it in Australia. You turn up there. If you lose it, there's no replacing. And this is like a ticket for like, it's like a few $100. And it's this, I don't know, it's this system which is quite frustrating. And I said to my son repeatedly, okay, just hold on to this. And he's like, I can hold it myself. He's very responsible. Lo and behold, he lost it. He went back to the accommodation, tried to get it. And I was like, oh, damn it. But I knew that he, like, weirdly, it was one of those cases where the ticket for 2 weeks we had looked very similar to a daily ticket. And we'd all thrown out our daily tickets. And I knew that it wasn't even carelessness necessarily on his behalf. And so I just sat down with him and I was like, okay, I need you to know, I like, that is a real pain and that is going to cost me, but I need you to know I forgive that. I forgive you for that. And then that's it. And then other times there'll be consequences. If he's being rude or if he's being selfish or, I don't know, just doing stupid stuff, there would be consequences. I think sometimes it's working out the intent and also sometimes talking to them about what you're doing with them and why. We're trying to work it out too, right? Always.
And I was thinking intent, and I was thinking of I have one son who is not the most careful person,
right?
Fun-loving, good-natured, great heart, and I would say I experience him as fairly careless a lot. And I'm one to really let things go. You know, whatever gets broken, it's just a thing. It's not worth stressing about. And yet every once in a while I catch him and I go, that was really careless. And that broke something of value. So we're going to go to the bank and get the money out, you know, and really give it the consequence.
Yeah.
But as you're talking, I'm thinking, I wonder if giving the grace more often than not then makes, when there is a real infraction that needs a consequence, it gives it more gravity.
Yeah.
As well. I hadn't really thought about that, especially with kids. And then the other point I was thinking of, as you talked about, is I was talking about, and maybe it doesn't line up, of giving grace or not giving grace. But I'm thinking, you tell me as a parent, is there ever a time when you gave a consequence that you felt like it kind of was a grace? It was the best thing.
It was a grace to do that. Oh yeah. My daughter on Instagram, like, wow, like monitoring your children online is the hardest thing. There's constantly ways around of doing whatever, like, you know, there's so many loopholes for parents to stay on top of. And I let her go on. They're allowed on at 13. I think I did it maybe like a couple of months before 13. And within a very short period of time, I'd been called to the principal. She'd met someone who was like a friend of a friend right on the other side of town, like some guy. There was all this stuff. And I was beside, and there was also messages from a guy that used to go to her school that was like sending her messages repeatedly. What's your address? I want to come around and choke you to death. And it was like repeated, like, I want to kill you and I want to do all this. So I'm like in such a short period of time, like, what? Like, and so, I took, she still remembers this as the greatest trauma of her life, but I just took the phone. That was just it. She had a burner phone. And maybe, I don't know, 6 months later or something, she'd got it. But yes, she was heading for trouble there. Of course, there needs to be those guardrails.
As you talk about that, I wonder about my own upbringing, that I was given a lot of grace and then, or what felt like grace. And then there were times where there's a hard consequence, but I probably needed that grace of the consequence as well, because I was out of line, and I knew it.
Yeah. And you don't want to have, like, if I've got a kid who's always like, you were always in the principal's office, blah, blah, blah. You don't want them to give them a sense of impunity. You'll always be fine. I'll never be cross, you know. They're going to be living in the real world. You're preparing them for the world. Yeah. So,
I appreciate that. That's kind of the rub that we give this current generation, that they're not given consequences and they go to work and you screw up and you get a consequence and they're shocked by it.
Right.
You know, on that, you wrote, and we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of the show, and you said, we live in an era when grace is an increasingly rare currency. And when I read that, I agree, but I wanted to ask you why. Why do you think that is, that there's less now seems to be less. I agree. And maybe
seems
ever.
to be less publicly. Because of the intersection of so many social trends, we are lonelier now. And the research shows that the correlation between loneliness and wisdom, we're more likely to be fearful of others.
Yeah, keep going. That's one of my questions I took out of the book as well. I was enamored by that.
Yeah. We're more likely to be fearful of others, to suspect people of poor intentions, to stereotype people, to distrust people. We feel let down. And there are massive billion-dollar corporations that are exploiting all those anxieties and fears every day. Every time we go online, we'll be fed things. And it's oppositional things. It's about them too, and the other side and what they don't understand. And that's why community groups are so important. People who you might volunteer alongside, or the parents committee at your local school, or for me at my local swim club. Now, there are some political views in my swim club. I'm like I can't even have that conversation. You know what I mean? Like there's a mix. There's a full mix across there's just people I disagree with, but it just doesn't matter and it's not just because we love the ocean and we love to swim and talk about all the incredible things that we see underneath the ocean, the surface, but it's because I see them as human beings who, even though they might vote for someone who I find dubious, they're still down there volunteering and looking after, we call them the little nippers, so the little kids learning how to swim. They'll volunteer, one weekend every couple of weeks. They'll be, if anyone's ever sick, there'll be fundraisers for them. There'll just be people looking after each other as a community. So you get to see a fuller version of a person, and you realize that you can have good values and still end up at different political positions. And that is just such an important thing. I've seen it in American politics right now, just the calls to recognize what we share is so much more important. And one of the great joys of my work, my writing for me over the past few years has been awe and wonder and grace, the stuff that we share. Like there might be a few people who are like, hate sunsets, boring, but there's very few of them. And so if you have conversations around those kinds of things with people around you, it can change the way you relate, I think.
Well, that statement right there, people around you. And I found myself, as I was reading, thinking about, I spend a lot of time in the grocery because I like shopping and I like food. So I spend a lot of time in the grocery aisles. And I spend a lot of time on trails, mountain biking, running. And both of those, I often come into people going slower than myself. And they're almost always so gracious. Like, oh gosh, let me get out of the way. I've never had somebody just block me in the grocery aisle and not let me by or on the trail. And they're so gracious. And yet I see a very different scenario and attitude, one in a car, that putting yourself in a box on wheels, people act in ways they would never act in the grocery store because we would be in a fist fight if they did, unless I was harnessing my own grace.
But, exactly. You're like,
but the tendency to, and then even worse, as you're talking about the isolation on social media, where we just mouth off like we would never ever do. And that was really stark to me as I was reading your book and your perspective on it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
The proximity to people is really important.
Yeah.
And anonymity hasn't helped us at all. Like I am somehow still on Twitter/X. Like, are you on it?
No, but I'll admit I do correspond. Actually, I correspond with the people on my shows. We tag, I think my team tags on everything, but Instagram is the one place where they tend to, they do the collaborations, so it'll post. And so I correspond there, and some of my kids will sometimes send me stuff. So you're on Twitter. I have my little drug
Instagram.
on Instagram.
Oh yeah. No, I'm on Instagram too. And I actually really like Instagram. It's a different community. And when Twitter first started, I found so many great people on there. Like you find each other. These are the people, I don't know, looking for the good or the absurd or the funny and
kindred
not being
spirits.
Hateful. Thank you. Yeah, I love that phrase. Kindred spirits. Exactly. Yeah. And now it's really hard to find them on there. Now I find that if I go on there and say absolutely anything at all, I'm served up to people that hate me never met me, but because I'm female or I work in public broadcasting, I'm a journalist, whatever, people that don't follow me, aren't even necessarily in my country, will see my tweets and just pile on to hate. And I've experimented in that forum for a long time. And I do find that if I go, okay, I used to be that if you engage in good faith, they'd go, oh, okay, yes, sorry, no, good point, thanks for responding. Yeah, it's even different when you get back to someone on a level. But over a while, I mean, that does have to have a very corrosive effect on kind of on society.
Yeah. It's an anomaly to me, or not an anomaly. It's just shocking sometimes to see the difference in how people react in different situations. So as you cite this, we all know it, the increasing number of people who are isolated and their main contact with people is remote. It's on the little screen. And even I was in Hawaii recently and we went by, so we're at a restaurant on the beach, live music playing. It's great. And we all know the concept of going by and there's a family and everybody's on their phones, looking at their phones. But this one, it was a family of 4 or 5 and the kids, both parents were looking at their phones and the kids didn't just have phones. They had tablets on the little stands, stood up with movies going and earphones. And these were kids that were, I would say 12, 13, 14. I'm like, why are they even on the beach? They could be in a closet and it wouldn't be any different. They're on a beach paying $50 a plate for food. But just that, even when we're together, we're not together. So we're isolated, and that removal, we don't have the opportunity to give grace. We don't have the opportunity to receive grace. And as you said, we're becoming this graceless culture, it seems. And we're
right. But again, with like playing on those fears, we'd be like, why would we give that person grace? Because we're enabling a whole bunch of things that we don't want to enable.
I did want to say also, you just mentioned it, lonely people. This is a quote right out of your book. Lonely people are more likely to cheat, think worse of others, and suffer from mental and physical health issues. I mean, this isn't just some, altruistic perspective of being part of a community. I mean, you're literally going to, this affects our very character, who we are. It's affecting. Yes.
Yeah. Because of that lack of connection with people and lack of understanding of other people.
Yeah.
And if you can somehow forget that there are completely decent people on a different side of a political spectrum, or that sometimes people do stupid things, or that we do stupid things, like there's an interesting thing, isn't there, in politics, the number of politicians or whatever that misspeak. And sometimes they're just lying about that. They said something and they now regret it because they're in trouble for it. Sometimes they actually do misspeak, or they said something 10 years ago that they now have learned or know better. And we're very cynical about that because we get lied to so much. But there are times when I misspeak, like all the time. Probably by the time I got out of breakfast and, like having breakfast with my kids, I will have said something like I haven't thought through, or and also having studied biography, and written a biography of Queen Victoria, like seeing the entirety of a person and thinking about, what do we judge them for? Which bit of her life do we judge her for? She said some horrendous things. She said some things that she would be cancelled for absolutely instantly now. But she also was a woman of kind of like great tenderness towards people around her, great loyalty. She had really fantastic characteristics. And you understand when you study people and history that we're all capable, even sometimes in the same day, let alone month, year, or lifetime, of greatness and smallness, of kindness and meanness. And so the conversation I want to have is, well, how do we pull on? We had one of our Australian politicians, Paul Keating, used to speak about needing to pull on the golden threads in our community. How do we pull on those? Because there's a lot of people making money out of the dark threads, and we need to be pushing back against that.
You remind me, and I just looked it up to make sure I didn't misspeak, but the idea of that and this was what I was looking for, we judge others by their actions, or how we perceive their actions at least, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. And that, you just remind me of that I can be so judgmental. I give myself a lot of grace.
Right.
For my own misspeaking or my own self-protective persona or ego or whatever. Go, well, I know I was a little off, but it's still, it's still me. I'm okay. And yet other people, we're so quick to just rape and pillage them on social media for saying a view that we don't like and acting like we're being hunted down by a saber-toothed tiger.
Right.
And instead somebody just they stated something that threatens our ideas and our identity. We're not at risk. We just feel threatened, like it's a saber-toothed tiger, and it's just somebody who has a differing opinion, and we judge them so harshly.
And we used to think of
me too.
Yeah, I think that's true though. But I think we used to think of online abuse and behavior as just very different. That was a virtual world. Yeah. It is the real world. If you're getting abused online, you will feel it in your stomach, in your skin, like the anxiety, the stress, all of it. It is our world now. But I think that's right. And especially we need to be thinking through public figures. Like I do write a lot about, I don't know, the Epsteins of this world, like the fact that for many years we forgave and didn't hold people to account for, rape, sexual assault, all the rest of it. Yeah. And yet on the other end, like we need to be able to weigh that against some people's kind of things that they regret or things that they don't necessarily mean, and be able to understand the full context they've said it in. King Charles III was in Australia over the weekend. And I was thinking about do you guys always talk about as well the Tampax thing? Do you know about that? No. Oh, well, there you go. You don't know about it. Everyone always talks about it here. When he was, probably is a bit of a dodgy example, but when he and Camilla were having their affair, they were recorded in those kind of phone tapping. And someone got a recording of them talking about what they would want to do. And he was like saying, oh, I wish I could just live inside your underpants. And he's like, and they were joking, I want to come back as a Tampax. That's what I would be. I'd be a whole rocket of Tampax anyway.
Got it.
And so that's Tampon Gate, and that was like a long time ago, and people always refer to it as a tawdry thing. Although I remember my grandmother at the time going, oh, didn't know he had it in him. She was quite pleased to hear him being at least, if not erotic, then flirtatious.
I appreciate the different interpretations of that scene. That's I like it.
But I was thinking about that over the weekend, and like that was a phone tapping. Like, who has not said a stupid thing to a lover or a partner?
Gosh. God forbid. I just watched a show with one of my kids. It's called Chaos Walking. Fairly recent. Yeah. It's got the Tobey Maguire, I think, the actor, the Spider-Man guy. Yep. Chaos Walking, where they're on this other planet, and the men have what they call the noise, which means any thought that they have is audibly said out here. So wow. Any thought they have. So, he sees a girl and he goes, oh my gosh, she's gorgeous. I wish I could be in her pants, whatever. And it comes out and it's said, she's like, what are you saying? I just stop saying it, stop thinking. And I'm sitting there relating because, oh my gosh, God forbid the thoughts that aren't even hardly conscious. They're just trash that goes in and out. Where did that come from? And to have somebody know that, and the things I might say on a phone call with a friend. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the question of like, what do we forgive ourselves for as opposed to what do we forgive other people for? And if we recognize our own humanity, we're more likely to go, okay, so you didn't mean that. Fine.
Yeah. Or it's not, as you said before, I appreciate it. It's not the entirety of the person. We have some of our greatest historical figures who did some horrific things. And they also did so
many of them.
Who didn't, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Even you go to the Bible, man, and they did some horrific stuff and they did some miraculous, glorious stuff.
Yeah. I mean, look at, Mahatma Gandhi, look at Winston Churchill and the flawed characters. Even they were some of the most revered in our culture. So I often wonder people who are very critical of others if they put that same criticism on themselves. Like,
Okay, I was going to ask that question, literally,
Yeah.
Julia. And it was the concept, kind of the you can't give what you don't have. Can you effectively deliver grace, give grace to someone else if you don't have it for yourself? That's a, kind of a different, you're over here going, or are we more prone to give ourselves grace and not other people?
I think it's inextricably linked. I don't think it's a neat equation.
Okay.
But I think that if you, I'm probably better at forgiving other people than myself, probably. Like holding myself to account for stuff. If I haven't,
perfectionist concept.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But I'm really conscious that kind of I need to be doing that. Yeah. And yeah, wait, what was your question again? Whether you can
I do
think you can show grace to yourself. I think you can show grace to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to do as well.
I don't want to leave a thought that I had just a moment ago, because another quote that I pulled out from the book, back on this loneliness aspect or separation from people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You said in many Western countries, the number of people living alone has doubled in recent years, and we are less inclined to join communities such as, churches and social organizations. So back over here, even COVID, did a lot of that where, you couldn't go to the gym, you couldn't go to church. And then when it was over, at least with churches, I'm still under the impression I haven't studied it recently, but at the time they thought there's a lot of people that are never going to go back.
Yes.
And so with that, interestingly, thinking about church and some of the biblical slogans and cliches that we got, one was, me praying in essence for God to give me patience. And I just want him to impart that to me. And the quote goes, well, and to do that, God will put you in a place where you need to exert some patience and practice it. Yeah. He's not just going to impart it. And I think the same thing, I wonder about that with grace too. So here are people that are isolated. They are not out having the opportunity to, again, give or receive grace. And is that another key reason or the key reason why we're seeing it decline in the culture?
Yeah, I think that could be. The lack of exposure to people, the lack of them experiencing it themselves, and the seeing the worst in people. I also think there is the need for a fundamental shift in a lens. If you look for it, you will see it all over the place. The thing about COVID, people were lonely and isolated then. A lot of people were angry, but there was also a pause in our culture. That year, everyone read more books. Everyone realized how much we needed each other. The earth actually was able to take a breath of air.
They slept more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there was if you weren't, we had a lot of lockdowns in Australia, and if we were limited to our suburbs or our communities, so people got really invested in their local parks and looking for small amounts of wonder around them. And I think that was a time of a real shift in thinking about who we are and who we want to be. What about the applause for the medical workers when it was at 5 or 6? I didn't live in a major city where they were doing that. New York and London, and everyone would be on their balconies or out their windows clapping and banging saucepan lids to say thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for putting your own lives at risk to do this for us. Those people are still doing that, as in still working to protect us from disease, still taking their own lives into their hands a lot of the time when they're in the hospitals or paramedics and so on. I'd like it if we kept up that applause. I thought it was a great way to think about what is actually keeping us going as a society. It's these people and showing a bit of gratitude. So even though we were isolated, it was also a time for, well, there was quite beautiful community too. Yeah.
You, I don't know if you said it or it just came to mind as you did, giving gratitude. I think you said that, giving gratitude. That was, I spent a lot of time in your book. You say it in the beginning of the book, and then you have the chapter. It's the chapter where you talk about people giving blood, which I intrigued myself with that concept. But the aspect of, you mentioned grace without expectation or applause, doing something in essence selflessly. And I've grappled with that concept a little bit. One of the people, he's no longer living, but that I have gotten a lot of guidance from, Anthony DeMello. He was a Jesuit priest, actually, and he was really blunt with the biblical religious context of doing something selflessly. And I'm going to paraphrase and exaggerate it, but he says it's impossible. You can't do something selflessly. If you go take money from the homeless person, you get the money. If you give money, you get that good feeling, that warm and fuzzy feeling. You're getting something out of it. Now, the latter is a more evolved form of selfishness that we would all espouse. But you just got me interested. I don't know if I came to a conclusion, but just that, again, maybe it's another tension with grace, which I've said that word so many times. Apparently, for me, there's a lot of tension with how we perceive grace. And I assume you too. That's why you wrote a book.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah.
Well, with the baggage of the way we look at it, and are we doing it selflessly? Are we doing it for applause or thanks? And we've seen that. We've seen somebody abuse that, probably do something for the applause.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I was fascinated to talk to people who study blood donors for the book, because they were like, we cannot work out why people do this. It's one of the things that really confounds them, because every couple of weeks they'll go and have really personal, intrusive questions asked of them. A needle stuck in their arm, take time out of their day, actual blood drawn from them, and
even people that were terrified of needles. You said
yes, I know, Australia's greatest donor ever, who's called the man with the golden arm. Who had that special blood type that mothers need to get an injection of, so that they're.
It was like over 1,000 times he'd given blood.
Oh yeah, over 1,000 times. Exactly.
And the dude's looking away because he doesn't like the needle. I like that.
I know. And it's quite good for a lot of introverts as well, because introverts who are like, I'd love to go and help, do some good in the world, but I am not good at, I don't know, stopping people in the street or doing big public
serving at a soup kitchen or something. Yeah.
So they serve quietly in these chairs with their blood draining out of their arms. But the experts will say, well, that's impure altruism, because they get that warm, fuzzy feeling. And that struck me as such a strange concept. I mean, I think there's often a lot of ego involved with philanthropy, but if that's impure, it's such that feeling of the warmth that you get of helping someone and having a purpose and doing something honorable. That's let it burn if they're if that's a warmth that I think we need to encourage everyone to kind of pursue. But when I met some of the super donors, they were the ones who for 50 years have gone down and done this every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And when they travel around the world, they've been able to tell me about all the donation centers across the US, because that's where they've been traveling to, and they'll book in and make it part of their lives. And look, I've been, and that's with no reward or recognition. Maybe sometimes they might, have some impurity about it, as the academics would put it. But actually, it is a very selfless thing to do. And I myself have had several surgeries, and I remember the first time, massive surgeries, the first time I had a blood transfusion, I remember the moment. And a nurse was holding my hand, and she was whispering into my ear actually about writing and things that I did, and then I came to again, I was so much stronger. I had life back in my body, and it's a really weird. Have you ever had a transfusion? Whose blood is this in my veins right now?
No, and I've pondered the gravity of that. I wanted to ask you, Julia, because you mentioned this in the book, and you're talking right now about surgeries and transfusions. And I don't know if it all relates to this, but you have dealt with cancer.
Yeah.
Tell me about grace, because we've been talking thus far about grace for ourselves and grace for other people, relationships. That in that sense, you got cancer. you can't attribute that to somebody else. I don't know who there is to forgive or not. I guess you could be mad at God for my dad just recently, gosh, what has it been? 6 months, got a surprise cancer diagnosis and died 6 weeks later.
Oh,
and
so
to look at that, he had a beautiful death is how we perceived it. And I think he did too. But in that, he had grace for I don't know, I'm grappling for the circumstances, for the event, for the bad luck, for the, however you phrase it. But there wasn't a person necessarily to attach it to.
Yeah.
It was a thing that you were a victim of. I mean, you were victimized at least by this sickness, this illness. And for you, how do you speak to the grace that you had for what happened in that case, in cancer?
Yeah. And before I forget to, the point I wanted to make about blood donors as well was that they don't know who it's going to. You don't know when you give blood if it's going to someone you like, someone who might have road rage, someone who might be, I don't know, a terrible parent, someone who might be just a complete jerk. And that's actually the beauty of it. There is a need. A paramedic won't come to a burning house and say, oh, wait, hang on a minute, you support this political party, I'm out.
Yeah.
That's ways that we love each other without questioning. So that's what I think really moves me about blood donation.
Yeah.
So with what happened to me, getting diagnosed with a really rare and unusual and kind of horrible cancer, because it involves so much extensive surgeries and it recurs, is that a lot of people were like, well, you've never said why me? Like, why me? Why someone else? Like, why someone down the street instead of me? And obviously you don't want it to be you. Weirdly, the things that have sustained me was being quiet and calm, and actually mentally I've raged and cried, like, don't get me wrong. Like the suffering is like serious and it's awful if anyone out there is going through that. Like, I know about those, dark nights of the soul and waking up in the middle of the night in a sweat and worrying about my children and all the rest of it. But I have found that what has kept me going is focusing on this, on the best of who we are, on awe, wonder, faith, grace, and it's amazing. I don't know if it's amazing, if it should be amazing or not, but it is amazing how much that can sustain you.
Yeah.
And I've considered that a real gift for me, that I've been able to hold on to those like life rafts, those ideas. So I'm in a hospital and I'll be looking around going, look at the way that nurse is. Look at the way she is with that guy. He was just yelling at her a second ago because he thought he was on a cruise ship, or I don't know, like wild stuff happens in hospitals. Like, it's so fascinating to watch. And it's fascinating to watch, some nurses are completely exhausted. They've been working too hard and they're not paid a lot. And so much is asked of them, but I've watched their acts. I've watched the way they anticipate your pain before you even recognize you're feeling it, or they cover you with a hot blanket when you haven't asked for it, or they gently sponge people, or like, there are so many infinite acts of grace in a hospital every single day that I do find it very moving. And I think that's partly why in Grace I speak so much about, blood donation and medical staff and paramedics, because you're just, again, I'm going back to the same point, I know, but you're just caring for another human being who needs it. So I find that when you're dealing with something like cancer, you're just very much stripped back to only the stuff that matters. And that's what's been able to keep me going. And to people write to me and tell me about, like you just said, like what it can be like, the moments of grace in their lives, but what it can be like when someone passes in your family and you are surrounded by each other and you are laughing and you are remembering and you're honoring someone. Like, it's actually wild what can happen in those moments. I've seen it so many times around me in hospital beds as well. Just that sense of everything else falls away, and this is it. This is who we are, and this is what we have in all our nakedness and vulnerability and like shame and imperfection. We have each other, and to care for someone, even at the most minute level. People have told me stories about nurses doing the tiniest things for them that have blown them away. I got an ice chip once that I will never forget because I wasn't supposed to have it. It was nil by mouth, like completely nil, and I was so parched. And it was illegal. Well, when I say illegal, it was forbidden, but she snuck me this ice chip, and my gratitude was, I can still feel it now. It was beyond me. But the way that they, can look after people in need, and it is as everyday and common and mundane as that, and it is simultaneously astonishing and miraculous. Yeah.
I had a lot of experience in hospitals. My oldest kiddo spent a lot of time in hospitals, and the power of influence of the nurses sometimes was everything. That they could make or break the experience, or even better, make or break our security and our fear. And it was everything. On that, Julia, I'm going to come back to blood again. You just have me thinking about it, thinking about literally the giving of blood, somebody having their blood. When you said that somebody else is going to get it that I don't know, but just the concept of somebody having my blood, period.
Right. Yeah.
Like, okay, but
it's crazy, right?
It is. And you also have a chapter, or you go into epigenetics, which is a big interest of mine. It's actually in my book. I use that study. Can't remember the guy's name, the rat study where.
Oh yeah. The licking of the rats, the mother licking the rats.
Oh, different one. This is the one where they gave them the smell. I can't remember what the chemical is, but it kind of smells like cherries. Gave them the smell of cherries, shocked them. Gave them the smell of cherries, shocked them. And so, of course, the smell of cherries, and they're just terrified, and that their children were terrified. And it went down like 4 generations of these rats get the smell of cherries, and they're terrified of them. And that happened 4 generations ago. So thinking about that.
Yes.
You talking about blood, to think about how much do I want to embody grace? Back to the example, like talking about our kids, embody grace that is in the very blood that I have. Would I be happy to give my blood and the good and bad in it to my child? Is my anxiety in there? Is my hate in there? Is my grace in there? As you were talking about that with blood, I'm thinking, holy smokes, I take that from a physiological, medical stance as much as a spiritual stance too, and go, I want to be the kind of person that my blood goes into somebody, they experience the energy, the positive energy of me within that, as opposed to something terrible, which I'm thinking about you talking about the kind of people who give blood, as opposed to, this is terrible, like some dystopian film where they're going around killing people for their blood. Right. You know, I think back to when I was first going vegan, and there was some book I read that talked about how terrible the meat is from a cow that's being horrifically slaughtered and abused, as opposed to a nice grass-fed cow that's shot when they don't know it, and the chemicals within that. Okay, there's my story. You've got me thinking on about literally does my blood have grace in it? Would I want my kid?
That's wild. So one thing that really preoccupied me when writing this was the idea, because I was thinking about my mother a lot. We talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, and we speak about this a lot in Australia with, as I said, the stolen generations and what happened to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. Is there any way of you've got trauma inserted in a generation? What if you had a real blast of goodness? What if someone came in, or a group came in, and there was just so much love? Can that change things? Can you turn it around? The cherry rice, like the cherry mice, not cherry rice, the cherry sniffing mice, like what could undo that trauma for them? And this is look, as you know, epigenetics there's still so much to figure out about it. And in some ways it's a nascent science. And certainly this part of it, there's a woman called Professor Isabel Mansoy, and she's at the University of Zurich. And she has been looking at how that actually can happen. With mice, they've inherited the stressors of their parents.
Yeah.
If you introduce what they call an enriched environment, and they never explain what that is, which I kind of love because it always makes me imagine what would be a really rich environment for a mouse. I guess, so
cheese.
Lots of food. Cheese? No cats.
Lots of cheese. And I pulled that out. You keep going, but I pulled that out. Living in enriched environments can reverse the traumatic genetics. These are my own personal notes, but I thought this is how we stop the cycle.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I've thought about that so much, like what form does that take? And I don't think we should ever, I really want to explore that idea more. I've had people come up to me after talks, like a woman who was a foster carer. It's like, I really want to know and understand more about that. Can I do anything really? Is the love that I show now, can that reverse anything? And obviously I don't know the answer to that, but that kind of love is never a bad thing. So yeah, it is a big question. What is in our blood?
What's in our blood? Well, and to you, what's enrichment? I thought of something my wife said a long time ago. It was in regards to food. And if you want to stop eating the bad food, you think just stop eating. She says, well, why don't you just try putting more of the good food in and more good food? And ultimately you kind of just push out. There's no room left for the bad stuff. Right. I'm thinking if I eat, 10 pounds of carrots, I have no room left for pie. Now, God forbid, I don't want to do that, but I like the concept of an enrichment. So pull more, we're back to that. Get out into the world, get with people, have the opportunity, and give and receive grace. And the more that we do that, the more we create that enrichment.
I think that's true. I mean, my brother a couple of weeks ago was involved in a bicycle accident. He was in hospital when he was sending me this message, and he didn't tell me. All I got was a photo of a woman going, incredible story of kindness of a stranger. And I go, and then he calls me, he goes, did you see the photo? I was like, no, I'm at work. Like, what? And I looked it up, and he goes, just look at her face. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, well, she was incredible. I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, I've had a bike accident and I'm in hospital. Oh. But he was so intent on telling me how this woman who he never met had sat beside him, called the ambulance, given him a jacket, waited with him for an hour or so. And he was so moved by that. And it's because we've been talking a lot about grace and what it looks like. And now he's going out to dinner. He and his wife are taking her and her family out to dinner next week. And like, my point being, it's what you look for and what you focus on.
I also pulled out, you said, anytime I say you said, I thought from something I read that you said, in essence, grace can be a chore. And I appreciate that by thinking it's only typified by the warm fuzzies. I feel so good in that chore that I do. Well, you tell me what you think. I do feel like I need to check my heart. And if I'm trying to be graceful and I'm gritting my teeth and I'm bitter, maybe just let somebody else with a better heart at the moment do it and give yourself some grace that you're not in the right headspace for it. And though sometimes it's not just going to be all warm and fuzzy, that it's viable to be a chore. I just appreciated you saying that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was some discussion about the cover of the book and about the inserts of the book. And I really wanted to have the sense of fire and sun, meaning that grace to me is very much like the sun. It warms us, it fuels us. Like, it genuinely does keep the world turning. Like when we talk about the hospitals, all the things I'm talking about then, if we only all acted in self-interest, then we'd be in trouble, right? But it is hard. It is difficult work. It's not just, I think another myth about it is that there's just people who just have it. You meet these beautiful souls who seem really just have a superpower of being able to love and who kind of walk through the world in a different way. That's not it. It can be, there will be a tension. There will be a grittiness. But the more you're able to move in that direction, the more you'll see how it can change you and it can change people around you, I think.
Oh, okay. You right there, you brought me to something else out of the book that I really interested myself with. You said wisdom, and you talked about, you mentioned that before, but you give a focus to that. But you said wisdom has components of empathy, compassion, self-reflection, emotional regulation, and discipline. Well, I got to admit, I'd like to be wise. I'd like to feel wise. I'd like other people to think of me as wise. And so if that's the case, how am I doing on empathy and compassion and self-reflection, emotional regulation, and discipline? It felt like a great accountability.
Checklist.
What?
Yeah. Checklist.
A checklist of accountability. If I do want wisdom, I don't know anybody who would say, nah, I'd rather be stupid. They do want wisdom. Well, if these parts, it kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning, the emotion of grace. I didn't think of it as an emotion, but that's probably where it's welling up from. So this call out of what wisdom is calls me to be a better person, a more peaceful person, a more joyful person.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and a more centered person. You won't be as thrown by things because you know who you are. I mean, we know that there's been documented decreases in empathy from studies in college students. We also know that one of the greatest sources of empathy is reading. People haven't been reading so much except for those years during COVID. So I think a lot about that.
I read that and I liked it because I read a lot, but I still kind of, why? Why? How?
Because you're imagining yourself in another world.
Oh.
And one thing that I've come back to repeatedly, and it's something I really actually have carried in my own life after writing this book, is the best way. Some people call it zoning out. The best way to think through, how am I going to respond to this person who's driving me nuts? How am I going to respond to this act of, harm that someone's done to me, or just someone driving me up the wall? Is pulling back. Just train yourself to pull back and go, okay, who are they? Why are they thinking that? Why are they doing that? Where have they come from? Is it, I don't know, are they dealing with something in their own life? Have they been taught how to hate? Have they, do they not know there's any other option? Are they going through a terrible breakup? Whatever. But even the act that is an exercise forces you to slow down and think about another person. Like, it sounds very obvious, right? But I have found that so useful in my own life. And it doesn't mean I go, oh yeah, that's fine. You can just kick down whatever, like you can just do something foul. It's not that. It's about going, how did they get there? And it will just temper you, because, I write about John Lewis, the great civil rights leader in the book, and how he said that when he was in those marches in the 60s and 70s, the civil rights marches, and he'd be walking along the street and he would see faces of hate along the way too, faces contorted with hate. And he would stop and look at them and go, what? You were a baby once. Like, what happened to you? Like, what happened to you? And that is the zoom. And that, at that point, it just calms you down.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking about what it is to be that other person. You're not assuming that everyone, is born or wakes up and wants to thrust a dagger into your heart,
Well, okay, I'm gonna come in to something you said on that aspect. There was I'm going to paraphrase a story told by Zig Ziglar, the famous motivational speaker, Zig, and he cited a study that I actually haven't. I didn't find specifically, but it was a study that was done a long time ago with very influential people, from world leaders and politicians and CEOs of big companies and whatnot, and that something like 80% of them were found to, being depicted as successful people, influential people, were depicted or shown to have had some significant poverty in their upbringing, or or a family member had a disability, a significant disability.
Right.
Culminating out of that what they extrapolated was they, in some ways, had to think beyond themselves. Life wasn't about them. They had they had to tune into other people. So thinking about another person, because you said, or wrote in the book, you said, in my research, the greatest examples of grace come from people who have been oppressed. So I related that to it. They've been oppressed. So I'm thinking these are not people with an abundance of circumstances. Maybe they had a deficit. They were, handicapped or abused or oppressed, however we want to put that. And that you found that they had the greatest examples of grace. And I'm wondering if you would correlate that to the oppression. It made them have to be more aware of just their own internal being. What was the propensity? What would you find the thread be of oppression as it relates to grace?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the empathy, there's the humbling, there's the breadth of understanding other people. Look, a lot of the people I spoke to, like, I was also trying to overcome the idea that it's just about a social order. It's about everyone being good. So you don't complain about injustice. So you will, that's, the idea that grace is accepting things as they are. Whereas I found that in a lot of social justice movements, I just spoke about John Lewis there, like some incredible examples of people understanding oppression and fighting for what is better, fighting for who we can be. And that is something often taught by ancestors, and holding on to that belief. We can do more and we can be more because we're capable of it. When former President Obama sang Amazing Grace at that funeral, and where there'd been a gun shooting and Reverend Clemente Pinckney had been killed, who was a friend of his, and he said he had no words. He'd been corresponding with Marilyn Robinson before, and he had no more words. Congress had already not done anything about guns when he thought they would after Sandy Hook, and then he just sang Amazing Grace. And I've watched that a few times on YouTube, and I've always found that powerful because of the way people around him stand up, and in their grief and in their mourning, they're reminded that we can be more and we can reach towards a better way of being and a better world, like a better way of relating to each other. And to have that hope in the midst of that pain, there's an incredible power to it. So, that's how I would link it to.
Yeah, it reminded me, it just got me thinking of maybe you're at rock bottom. What's the alternative to have grace? It's just the hell of bitterness. And
yeah, totally. I mean, sometimes that's all you have to hold on to. I don't want to equate being terribly oppressed with being very ill, but like I've been at the rock bottom of being very ill, and then sometimes that's all you have left.
Yeah.
Like to hold on to the beauty that we have and to relish every moment, and to see that the world is much bigger than ourselves. I mean, we've spoken a bit about looking outwards, and I'm constantly struck by how much awe and grace as part of awe is about getting people to pay attention to the world, and how psychologically important it is to focus on things other than themselves. There was this fantastic study about going on awe walks. And I would equate an awe walk, actually. An awe walk is, going out and noticing what's happening in the world around you, like trees, birds, like parks, whatever's happening. I mean, you could actually think about it as a grace thing too. Like if you're walking through life trying to identify when grace is happening, what will happen to you. So they had these two groups. One went on the awe walk and the other just went on a walk. And the awe walkers had to keep a diary of what was happening and take photos of themselves. And at the beginning of this, I think it was like a 6-week experiment, the photos of themselves, they would be like this, like, here I am, first awe walk, see how we go. By the end of it, Their faces were like, I can't really do it in here, but I'm trying. Their faces were like tiny in the frame as they were going, oh, look at this tree that's just burst into bloom. Oh my gosh, that kind of bird is up there, and check that mountain in the background. Or what is some sunrise or sunset? And it just struck me how that shows this is the perfect antidote to narcissism, and how the people who went through that were just training themselves, however briefly, to pay closer attention to the world.
Yeah.
We're more content, pro-social. It's about training yourself to look beyond yourself. Yeah.
This book, here, I'm going to grab it. I don't have the fancy finished version. I have the bound, bound galley copy.
Wait, should I get a fancy one? I've got one here.
Yeah, I haven't even seen the fancy one. You said you were talking about sun and fire and whatnot. Oh, look at that.
Get them to send you one, because look, at sparkles.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, it is meant to be like the sun.
Well, even in the black and white, with no color and sparkles on it, Julia, I right away, I was actually reading it at my home office, and I felt comfort. I felt, I thought about just emotional regulation from reading your book, not just the stories, but even the tone and your own, your graciousness in it. And if I was to put a word to it, it's one that you said a little bit ago, and it helped me have more hope.
That's so good to hear.
And I was going to say in humanity, yeah, but even in myself, like
definitely.
What wealth do I still have before me as I become more gracious? Even saying that, I want to take a deep breath and let my shoulders down.
Limber up. Yeah.
And just, be grateful and be hopeful. And I, thank you for being here.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you for making the effort to put this message out that is benefiting me. If nobody else has heard this, the point is hoping that tens of thousands of people will, and go buy the book also. But thank you for the gift it is to me, and for doing what you've done to elevate grace.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to talk to you. The way you read the book and engaged with it and thought about it was just really wonderful.
Well,
that's an honor.
It's my show, and I have the privilege now at this point of talking about whatever I care to talk about for an hour and 40 minutes. And this has been a gift. I could do more. So just thank you. I'm eager to share this message, but I think most of all, I'm eager to continue to walk in it deeper for myself. So Julia, thanks.
That's really beautiful to hear. Thank you so much.
Friends, thanks for joining me on this drive again. That is Julia Baird, and she's got the Not Stupid podcast. So wherever you're listening to your podcast right now, you can find it in. Just type in Not Stupid. And then the book that just came out, Bright Shining, How Grace Changes Everything. Got a question for myself, a response to Julia. Let me know. Connect with me at kevinmiller.co. I hope this episode helps you drive further, and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Yeah,